Prehistory or pre-literal history is a period of human history between the first known use of stone tools and the beginning of recorded history with the invention of writing systems. Dates vary wildly from region to region. For example, in European regions, prehistory cannot begin before 1.3 million years ago, which is when the first signs of human presence have been found. However, in Africa and Asia, contain sites dated as early as 2.5 and 1.8 million years ago. Britain was slower to grow in population due to the Ice Age. The earliest known humans arrived in these lands around 900,000 years ago, on the Neolithic coast, where the first tall flints and footprints have been found. Prehistory then stretches from then until the Roman invasion in 43 AD. Britain at this time was connected to northern Europe by an area called Doggerland. Early occupants of Britain saw a different place to what we see now. At times it was warm enough for animals to roam, followed by the hunter-gatherers, where it is believed their main diet was animals and fish. A time when animals like bears and mammoths once roamed the land. At times, Britain was gripped by severe cold stages. Large sheets of ice, glaciers, covered much of the landscape. During this time, the climate was unsettled, changing from periods of warm or cold. Humans would have moved to be able to hunt for food. Around 10,000 BC we enter the Mesolithic era, also known as the Middle Stone Age, believed to have lasted until 4000 BC. During this time, Britain was inhabited by hunter-gatherer communities who were heavily reliant on natural resources such as fish, game and wild plants for sustenance. The climate was now warmer and wetter, and this allowed for the growth of dense forest and the expansion of wetland habitats. This provided a rich environment for the Mesolithic people who used tools and techniques to exploit their resources. It was during the Mesolithic era that Britain became an island around 7000 BC. Doggerland was now flooded and now under the North Sea. We start to see the Mesolithic settlements such as Blickmead by Stonehenge and Cara in Yorkshire, both around 8000 BC. Overall, the Mesolithic period in Britain marks a significant transition from the harsh conditions of the Ice Age to a more sustainable and resourceful-rich environment, and paved way for the innovations of the Neolithic period. Around 4000 BC, migrants began to appear from Central Europe. These people brought new ideas, leading to the radical transformation of society and the landscape. that has been called the Neolithic period. In Britain, the Neolithic period lasted from around 4000 BC to around 2200 BC. This will just be a brief look at this time, and I will add some more videos in the description for those who want to have a more in-depth video. During this time, there was a significant change in the way of life of the people living in Britain. When the era started, Britain was covered in forest, and the Neolithic people started to clear the forest for farmland, moving from the hunter-gatherer lifestyle to one of more farming. We start to see establishments of settled communities as people began to cultivate crops and raise livestock. This led to an increase in population density and a greater diversion of labour as different individuals began to specialise in particular tasks. The Neolithic period also saw the development of new technologies, such as the use of polished stone tools. Developments suggests a more complex and organised society. This period also saw the constructions of so many impressive monuments, and so many that we can still visit today. A causeway enclosure is a type of large prehistoric earthwork common in the early Neolithic. An example of a causeway enclosure is Knapp Hill, constructed in around 3700 BC. Long barrows, chambered tombs, constructed in the early Neolithic time around 3800 BC and 3500 BC. Perhaps one of the biggest mysteries of the Neolithic monuments is the curses, built around 3400 BC to 3000 BC. Then we come back to the Avebury area, where the sanctuaries started to appear around 3000 BC. Avebury Henge started around 2800 BC and was finished around the time of the late Neolithic era to the early Bronze Age. Like Avebury, Stonehenge was built in stages. The ditch was built around 3000 BC and the area was roughly finished around 2300 BC. Silbury Hill, the prehistoric artificial chalk mound near Avebury, dates for construction differ, possibly the late Neolithic period completed around 2400 BC. The late Neolithic moving into the Bronze Age is perhaps the most confusing. The timeline differs from where you look, anything from 2500 BC to 2200 BC. The confusion could be because of the arrival of the beaker culture. The beaker culture are characterised by their distinctive bell-shaped pottery vessels, often used as beakers, which were used for various purposes including burials. The arrival of the beaker people in Britain is a subject of ongoing research and debate among archaeologists. It is generally believed that the beaker culture spread to Britain around 2500 BC. The beaker people likely migrated from the continent. Their arrival marked a significant cultural shift in Britain, as they brought with them new technology, social practices, and possibly new languages. Research using samples of more than 400 prehistoric skeletons from across Europe have uncovered new information about a period when a wave of migration rolled westward across Europe, almost totally displacing the earlier population in many places, including Britain. It's believed that at least 90% of the ancestry of Britons were replaced. How this happened, they do not know. It could have been through fighting or disease. Either way, this was a big change, and in a possible short period of time, with some saying it had taken a couple of years to possibly 300 years. More research is being done. This area of time within Britain is still confusing, but what the DNA evidence shows is that the Neolithic people were replaced, and they never came back. But this change of DNA also shows the importance of these sites, for the beaker culture did not abandon the sites that the Neolithic people started to build, but they carried on building them, and they often changed things, which shows the importance of the areas. But why? Well, we'll look into that for a future video. Something I found out whilst researching the period of the beaker people is that some people now class this short period of time between 2500 BC to 2200 BC as the Copper Age. It is characterised by the widespread use of copper for tools, weapons and various artefacts. People began to experiment with the smelting and casting of copper. This Copper Age was a time of cultural development, with communities becoming more settled. Population grew and larger and more complex societies emerged. Copper was used to create a wide range of items, including weapons like axes, knives and spears. This was a significant advantage over the Neolithic people, which primarily used stone tools. They also created objects like jewellery and pottery were also being made. The craftsmanship of copper artifacts often demonstrated the skills of the people of this era. The emerging of metalworking allowed for the increased trade, as copper and other resources could be exchanged between regions. The Copper Age eventually gave way to the Bronze Age, as people discovered that mixing copper and tin produced stronger metal bronze. This led to even more sophisticated tools and weapons, and marked a significant technology achievement. The monuments like Avebury were still being built and changed over time, showing that these sites that the Neolithic people started were still held in high importance and sacred areas. The Bronze Age in Britain lasted from around 2200 BC to 800 BC and was characterised by the use of bronze. During this period, Britain saw the rise of several distinct regional cultures. Trade networks continued, particularly in tin and copper, which was essential for making bronze. The people of Britain also traded with Europe and may have been part of a wider cultural and economical networks. It's a time when monuments were still being built, and the arrival of the Bronze Age barrows, which are often found close to the sacred sites such as Stonehenge and Avebury. There are many different types of Bronze Age barrows: bell barrows, round barrows, pond barrows, just to name a few, but they are often found in groups. Towards the end of the Bronze Age, we also see a possible start of the hill forts appearing. Overall, the Bronze Age in Britain was a time of significant social and cultural change, marked by the widespread use of bronze, the use of distinct regional cultures, and the continuum of trade networks. And then we enter the last of the prehistoric era, the Iron Age. The Iron Age in Britain is a historical period that followed the Bronze Age and is characterised by the widespread use of iron for tools, weapons and other implements. This era in British history is generally considered to have started around 800 BC and lasted until the Roman conquest of Britain in 43 AD. The use of iron became more common during this period, replacing bronze as the primary material for making tools and weapons. Communities in Britain often built hill forts as defensive structures. These hill forts were typically located on high ground and surrounded by defensive walls and ditches. They served as places of living and protection. The Iron Age society in Britain was organised into different social classes. These included tribal chiefs or kings, warriors, craftsmen, farmers, slaves or servants. Social hierarchy and power structure were often reflected in the layout and fortifications of hill forts. Farming remained a fundamental part of Iron Age society, and communities continued to grow crops and raise livestock. The end of the Iron Age is often associated with the Roman conquest, but the Roman rule was gradual. Some areas of Britain were under Roman control while others remained independent for a time. The Iron Age gradually merged into the Roman period, with the Roman influence affecting various aspects of British life. This is a brief look into the prehistory eras, but I am sure we will look more closely into some of them over time as we look deeper into these ancient monuments. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. That's all for this video. Until the next time, stay safe.